Hello, good evening and welcome to the Hot Seat. In the Hot Seat today we have a leading legal personality, Mr. Kushan Dialvis, President's Counsel. Good evening and welcome onto the show, Mr. Dialvis.
Good evening, Faraz.
Thank you for being in the Hot Seat. We thought we'll ask you anything other than the bond. Tell me, there's a move to change our constitution and so on. Is there a need for constitutional reform?
I personally think that there is a need for constitutional reform because the constitutions must keep on evolving with the times. So I'm not a person who's goes with the theory that the constitution must be kept on and on through the test of time. It must evolve. Now, one good example is regarding constitution. I think if one is to take the example of the United States of America, this is the second time in 16 years that the candidate who got the most number of votes had lost the election because of their electoral college system. So it's up to them to decide whether. But still, for all, democracy means the will of the majority. So here, this is in 2000, now again in 2016. Both occasions, the Democratic candidate got more votes, but lost the election. So this is why I say the American Constitution is there, but I personally feel they must look into it. Same way, even in Sri Lanka, this present 78 Constitution has undergone, I believe, 19 changes.
Right.
So if there are certain changes with regard to various matters that have come up since the end of the Civil War, we should look into that and try and address those problems.
But why can't we have amendments? Is it do you think that there needs whole-scale reform of the Constitution? Why can't we have the 20th or the 21st and 22nd Amendment?
Yes, I'm not for a moment saying that you should have a brand new Constitution. Certainly not. My position is that if it can be done by amendments, it should be done by amendments. It's not necessary for the sake of having to bring a new Constitution in toto, because even when what I meant by evolving of constitutions means with the necessary amendments.
Right.
So that is a matter, I think, for the Constituent Assembly or the Constitutional Assembly to decide. But I think with then the 20th Amendment, it can be done.
And what do you think are the, in your experience, what are the areas that need a close look constitutionally?
I think one would be expanding the Bill of Rights area. Then establishment of the independent commissions, strengthen them. Because now, for one, I'm not very happy with the way the present Constitutional Council is constituted. Because it's again in the hands of the politicians. Out of the 10 members, there are 10 members. Only 3 are from outside Parliament. So you see, these independent commissions are a must. And those independent commissions must be strengthened. And also, we may have to look into new independent commissions, like Public Service Grievance Commission and so on and so forth, which we have dealt in our report when we gave with regard to the Public Representations Committee on Constitutional Reform.
You were on that committee, weren't you?
Yes, I had the privilege of being on that committee.
And do you think that there are parts of the Constitution that's a bit unfair on some? Or not?
No, I wouldn't call, because if it's unfair, then it would be
would have been challenged.
Illegal or whatever, if it's one would call it unfair.
Yeah.
But of course there may be certain groups may view certain provisions as being unfair, but certainly it's not illegal or unlawful. So because otherwise it's the supreme law of the land.
Yeah. You're talking about in the US where the winning candidate actually polled less of the popular vote
Exactly.
than the losing candidate. That won't happen in our presidential system here, will it?
No, it can't happen.
But it could it happen at parliamentary level or not?
Parliamentary level, with the present PR system, I do not think.
Right.
But certainly it happens if it's a first past the post. Now, for instance, a good example is there, even in England.
Yeah.
Now, I'm no admirer of UKIP,
Yeah.
the UK Independence Party, but they poll far more votes
Yeah.
than the SNP, the Scottish National Party.
Right.
And they got only one seat in Parliament, whereas I believe the Scottish National Party has about 20 or even more. So this is the same problem, I think, which was reflected in the 77 election result, where the SLFP polled over 2-3 million votes and had, I think, 7 or 8 MPs,
Eight seats, yeah.
seats, and whereas the TULF had about 800,000 votes and had about 18 seats.
And they were the official opposition.
As well. So that also is another problem. Now, that is, I think, if one goes by the what's happening in England, that's a matter which they will have to look into, because first past the post also has that
sort of drawback. On that note, we'll take a short break and return to the hot seat. Don't go away. Do join us. This is, after all, the hot seat. Welcome back to the hot seat, where we're joined today by Mr. Kushan Diavis, President's Counsel, and talking about the constitutional reform process. Mr. Diavis, do you think we have had promises and promises and more promises? Do you think that there is a real chance of constitutional reform within this sort of rather polarized political structure that we are having here in government, this national unity government and so on?
I feel that they are in a position for this reason because of the national unity government. The national unity government on paper has, I believe, almost a two-thirds majority required for the constitutional amendment. But of course, if there are certain amendments which touch articles which require referendum, and the Supreme Court deems so, then one would have to go for a referendum. But I personally feel, as much as the government wanted the public representations to be sought for the first time in the history of our country regarding constitutional reform, when the amendments are brought out, I personally feel that it would be best that it is put to a referendum. I don't think that especially if there are provisions regarding the devolution of power and also regarding the presidency, I believe that it should, and of course it's all in the hands of the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court deems so, it must be put to a referendum, because after all it's the people who have to decide. And I don't think the government should shy away from holding a referendum on the new constitution.
Well, in Britain they had a referendum, they voted to go out of, to exit. And now there's all sorts of problems, including a recent legal ruling.
Yeah, this is something I think may be worrying the government as well, Britain and Colombia.
Yeah.
Both, even the peace treaty with the FARC rebels were rejected by the people. So, but that does not mean that a referendum should not be be held, especially if it's regarding devolution of power and also reduction of or taking away certain presidential powers, or maybe abolishing also. I do not know what ultimately the decision of Parliament would be. Because especially I feel that with the provincial council system, a strong executive presidency must remain. Otherwise, there must be alternate safeguards if there are going to be devolution of power and weakening of the executive presidency.
As a legal man and who who takes your cases to the Supreme Court as well, how does one cope with this sort of almost anomaly where we had one Chief Justice who wasn't really a Chief Justice anymore because it was all changed? And what happens to the judgments that Chief Justice who doesn't appear anymore, what happens to those judgments?
No, there is provision in the Constitution.
Right.
I beg to differ, of course, as to whether that particular Chief Justice was not or never a legal Chief Justice. That's a different opinion, and that's a different topic, I guess. Yeah. But still, for all, there is provision in the Constitution that all acts done, judgments delivered, will be valid in law.
Right. Because
there was also a situation where certain appointments were made when the Constitutional Council was not duly constituted some time back, because there was wrangling over the appointment of a particular member. I'm saying about somewhere around 2010, I believe. And there were, notwithstanding that, there were, not 2010, I'm sorry, 2006 or 7, and the Constitutional Council was not properly functioning. But still the appointments were made to various bodies, including the Supreme Court.
And then
so therefore there is a provision in the law, and that it does not make it null and void.
And do you think that the shape of our judiciary is better or more settled now than it has been? We had these various palpitations.
Yes, at the moment I would say there are no palpitations. So
right.
I would.
No palpitations?
None whatsoever, because it's basically everything is functioning smoothly vis-a-vis the appointments, and it's been...
so there is hope. There is hope then.
Keep our fingers crossed.
All right.
Because the politicians change from time to time, so one doesn't know. Right. One can't predict their behavior.
On that note, we'll take another short break from the hot seat. Don't go away. Come right back. Hello, good evening, and welcome back to the hot seat, where we are with Mr. Kushan Dialvis, President's Counsel, here to help us understand the constitutional reform process. Mr. Dialvis, so there is some need to keep up with the times, and so as time we need to evolve. But what about the appetite of the legislators to get this over and done with?
That is, of course, a very difficult question to answer, because it apparently the legislate, as long as if they think of the country, then we can go forward. But if each one thinks of outmaneuvering the, or their own political interests, then of course we'll be stuck.
How far away do you think we are when the people of this country are going to have to go to the private sector to actually run the country, like Mr. Trump? Do you think that'll ever happen?
one has to take it with the South Asian mentalities also that comes into play. But if the politicians fail, it may be the private sector, or maybe an ex-military man who's now a civilian.
There might be.
They may go to, because if they are disgusted with the mainstream politicians, they may look to someone outside the ring.
Looking from the outside, looking in, we had a politician who came in and he said, "I will bring peace." But nobody really believed him because the same promises made by previous presidents and previous leaders. But lo and behold, he delivered the goods. And so you would imagine the people were truly grateful for a lifetime and beyond. So it must have come as a shock for President Rajapaksa to actually face a defeat in his attempt to, on a third attempt, unprecedented and so on. What do you think the public, how did you feel about that? Did you feel that it was a fair change to the rules to allow him to go for a third term and beyond?
That is your discussing the 18th Amendment.
Yeah.
The 18th Amendment was brought about, I wouldn't want to comment on the basis of whether it was proper or not, because basically the Parliament adopted it.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court, led by a bench of the former Chief Justice, Justice Shirani Bandaranaike, I believe, upheld it. And so in those circumstances, it became law.
But we didn't have a referendum for that one.
There was no referendum because because like I said, it's the Supreme Court that has to deem.
Right.
And also what happens is when you go before the Supreme Court can say these particular articles can be amended, and but without a referendum. But these particular articles require the amendment of a referendum. So I believe regarding the 18, there were one or two articles which didn't were found to be which necessitated a referendum, but the rest went through. But then again, about the people's will and the change, even Winston Churchill, after winning World War II, was sent out of power.
Indeed.
In, I believe, in 45.
Yeah. So not a big deal. But the people seem to have, by the time January 2015 came, they seem to have tired of this mantra of the war victory. And Sri Lankan people obviously chose for change, perhaps because they were tired of, and they wanted it to go in a different direction. But what's your take? Do you think the country is going in a different direction, a good direction?
Certain aspects, yes, and certain aspects, no, I would say.
What about the delays in the law? I mean, I read on the website of the Ministry of Justice that on average 900,000 cases are carried forward to the next year. And, in certain land cases it can take years and years. Isn't this all unfair on the people waiting for some form of justice to work?
Definitely it is unfair, and that is a matter that has to be addressed. And recently there have been new circulars issued by the Judicial Service Commission, whereby it has been said that if it has been decreed that cases over 10 years should be heard day to day. and concluded. But of course, there are certain practical problems about like adjusting the lawyers' diaries, and also the Bar Association has made representations, and at the moment I think it will be implemented from the 1st of January. So certain steps are being taken, and in addition there are certain other amendments that are necessary to the Civil Procedure Code, then also to certain the rules of the Supreme Court, and also when it comes to substitution, and there are certain matters where even a change of a minister and substituting the next minister can create sort of delays. So there are certain matters which I believe can be addressed and it can be expedited. And also, as a member of the legal fraternity, I say that there is a duty on our part also to ensure that we cooperate 100% with the judges to expeditiously dispose of cases, because I'm a person who firmly believes it's like a well. Moment you draw water, there is more water that comes. So if there is an expeditious disposal of cases, the litigants also would like to or they would be inclined to file more and more cases. So it's a win-win situation if that happens. Then one other aspect is, I believe, is that we must revisit our cost regime. That is where a person files a frivolous case or frivolously resists a case, a claim, then he must be cast in heavy costs. Now we have an archaic system where the cost regime is totally inadequate. Here, because sometimes one very simple example is where people take loans from the bank, and in filing the answer, they deny the existence of the bank. So, that sort of,
that's frivolous.
Absolutely frivolous. So what I say is, at the end of the case, I think one must go into the possibility of seeing whether the actual costs can be awarded, actual costs expended. This is just one example I mentioned.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, Mr. Jarvis, for being on the hot seat and for sharing your thoughts on what can well turn out to be an important chapter in our country's history. But final question, what do you think? Do you think that inside the next 20 years, that the people of Sri Lanka will go to the private sector in search of a leader to lead their country? Personal question.
Firstly, I must thank you for inviting me over here.
Pleasure.
The answer to that is, if the politicians fail, certainly they will.
Thank you, Krishan Jarvis, for being on the hot seat. Thank you very much. And thank you for watching the hot seat. We'll be back, same time, same place, next Wednesday. Take care and good night.